A healthy Jupiter in your consciousness is going to exhibit the traits of Jupiter in Cancer, which is the zodiac sign where Jupiter's agenda in our consciousness, it's the most compatible. But this doesn't mean that if you don't have Jupiter in Cancer, that you can't have or you don't have a healthy Jupiter overall. Or it also means that if your Jupiter is in Cancer, it doesn't necessarily mean that your Jupiter is thriving. It just means that if Jupiter is in Cancer, there's a stronger tendency to have, since birth, a stronger, more healthier Jupiter consciousness. But the main point is that we develop each planet as our lives go on. And so a person with a healthy Jupiter consciousness is going to be exhibiting the traits of when Jupiter is in Cancer. So let's talk about why Jupiter does so well in Cancer and describe some of the traits of a person with a healthy Jupiter, how they'll be behaving in their life. So first of all, Jupiter is a male planet along with the Sun and Mars, the two other purely male planets, and the Sun and Mars are both friends of Jupiter. So male planets, they give us the ability to think in logical terms and to be able to essentially see the chains of cause and effect and how the natural organization of the world is built upon objective and logical processes. So we talked also a lot about how Jupiter gives us this ability for abstract thinking, to be able to see deeper layers of logic and more subtle layers of logic underneath the surface of our concrete reality. So the sign of Cancer is the awareness that we have of the emotional currents flowing through us in any given situation. And I was taught throughout my life, and I'm sure most people have been taught, that there is a dichotomy. The polar opposites are emotions and logic, and that is a universal truth, that these are two opposite things. But it is not true. We have bodily sensations we call emotions for very specific reasons, both motivational reasons, but also just on the biological level. So biologically, most of what we call emotions, they originate from the secretion of peptides in our small intestine and partially in our large intestine. So when those peptides are secreted, they travel along our bloodstream, they go into our brain, they're translated into what are called neuropeptides, and then those neuropeptides regulate and they trigger the release of neurotransmitters along pathways in our brain. And then those neurotransmitters give us feelings such as a pleasurable feeling or a feeling or a motivational feeling, the desire to do something, a motivation. They give us unpleasurable feelings, they give us fear, they give us pain, and to tell us to not do something, to avoid certain situations. So we feel emotions, and those emotions are regulated through this biological process, and it results in us, again, the end result is a sensation within us, what we call an emotion. So you can see that it's a purely logical process that our body is performing. And it really displays the sophistication of the human being, of how our bodies work. And even complex animals, many animals also feel emotions. So as you can see, emotions on a strictly biological level are extremely logical. There's a chain of events that happens that causes us to feel something. So taking the next step, what is causing that initial gut reaction, that initial release of peptides in the small intestine? Well, the answer is that it is a response to external stimuli. We're receiving information from the world, and then we react to it. So Cancer is a female sign. It's the fourth sign of the zodiac. Female signs are even signs, and these are the signs that give us abilities to receive things, to be receptive to the world. And of course, Cancer is a water sign, which just is a symbol for our emotional world. So our response to the external world triggers this biological reaction. And then again, it results in what we call an emotion or a feeling. And we say, I got a gut feeling from something, which is oftentimes describing an intuitive reaction. And that is when there is a very strong reaction to something, when many peptides are released. If you respond to a situation, your gut responds because all of those peptides are being released simultaneously and essentially very quickly translating into your brain a strong emotional sensation about something. And of course, when we eat food, nutritious food, the gut way it responds, it says, oh wow, the nutrients in this food are going to make the body healthier. And so keep eating this food. So we feel good when we eat really nutritious food. And the opposite, when we eat bad food, your stomach feels bad, but you also have an emotional reaction to it. And your body is telling you to eat less of that. So emotions are very much rooted in a biological process that begins in our stomach. So if you're interested in this concept, this way that the emotions work, I would recommend the book The Molecules of Emotions by Candace B. Pert, PhD, and she gives a really profound look at how our emotional world is rooted in this biological process. I'm going to return to Jupiter here in a second, but let me first say, people who have, say, a disruption in their endocrine system, the regulation of hormones, these people, they could secrete hormones at excessive levels or not enough hormones, which causes them to feel certain things. But again, look at the strict biological root of it. There's a logical chain that you can point to that is causing emotions to be exhibited in ways that are not appropriate for a certain situation. So we also all have cultural factors that say we should respond emotionally to certain situations, like you don't laugh at a funeral. Other cultures, you celebrate a death of a person. Other cultures no. So there are social norms that say when and when not to emote certain things. And take the example, say someone has a very strong emotional reaction when their car breaks down. But at the same time, say they have plenty of money to get the car towed, to call a cab, to fix the car, and everything's fine on a monetary level. They're not in a super crisis, but they're still extremely irritated and have a very angry and frustrated reaction that for an unreasonable amount of time, say they're affected by it for a couple weeks, and you say, oh, that person is acting illogically towards this situation. Well, then you look at it and you say, why? Why is this person being illogical about it? Well, you dig into the past of the person. You could say they're feeling this intense over-the-top emotion because they're fearing for their survival. Maybe they have a lack of confidence in themselves in their way to get themselves out of a certain situation. They feel like they can't handle stress or pressure, so they'll freak out. Or they've been feeling frustrated with their life for a long period of time and it's finally boiled over. So as you can see, although this emotion isn't helping the person solve the problem any better, say the problem is already resolved, they're still feeling intense, illogical intensity. You can point to an underlying reason why they're doing that. And maybe they're aware of that underlying motivation or that underlying impulse. Maybe it's a past trauma for why they're feeling how they're feeling. Or maybe they're not, maybe they're aware of it or maybe they're not aware of it, but you can go into those psychological layers and discover where that emotion is rooted in and why they're feeling the way that they're feeling. So as you can see, you can create a logical chain of events for why people feel any emotion, even if that emotion isn't appropriate at the time, whether it's biological or whether it's rooted in other psychological issues. So what does this have to do with Jupiter? Well, as I said, Jupiter is a planet of logic. It's a male planet. And Jupiter, exalted in the sign of emotions, of the movement of emotions, movable water sign, a person with a high functioning Jupiter and a healthy Jupiter is able to see and understand why people feel the certain ways that they feel. They see emotions as logic. Maybe they don't define emotions as logical, but they're able to go into a person's psychology and discover why they're feeling a certain feeling. They can understand emotions on a deeper level. They have what we call emotional intelligence. Some people say that emotional intelligence doesn't exist, but as I just explained, there is an intelligence, a biological intelligence for why emotions are there in the first place and why we're feeling them. And to be able to understand why people do and behave and feel the way that they do, we just call that emotional intelligence. And Jupiter is very good at that when Jupiter is in Cancer. And any person who has a highly functioning Jupiter will have a natural skill at psychology. So being able to dive into the layers of why people do behave and think the way they do. And as I was saying, one of the abilities of Jupiter is to understand abstract concepts and an intelligence towards abstraction. And a lot of people, when they think of abstract, they think of, say, chaos, say how abstract art is very chaotic, or abstract music, like atonal music. There doesn't seem to be a pattern there. And that's not necessarily what abstractness is. And a lot of people will feel that emotions are very abstract, that they're hard to get at the root of why we're feeling them. And people will say, I don't know why I'm feeling it, I'm just feeling it. So they can't get to the underlying motivation of that emotion telling them something. They just know that it's there. So a strong Jupiter and a healthy Jupiter is able to get into the abstract layers, and not just the logical layers like of biology, but to get to more less definable areas, the subtle layers of a person's psychology, and uncover things that a person may not have been consciously aware of that they couldn't put into language or put into words. So this is this ability to kind of go into the less definable layers of our psyche and to be able to find truth in it and to be able to uncover things on what we say abstract levels. So this is a skill of Jupiter, and we're talking about a very interpersonal, human-to-human discovery process, because humans are these complex beings. A healthy Jupiter doesn't really look at a human and get confused. They can dive into the subjective worlds of humans, of another person, and be able to swim in how they're feeling. They can be empathetic towards another person. So it gives a healthy Jupiter gives a very strong ability to see the complexity of human beings, appreciate that complexity, but also be able to define patterns within people that maybe they aren't even able to define themselves. So it gives a strong understanding towards human beings in general. And so that's what a good psychologist does, or a good therapist. They're able to empathize and also go deeper into the way the person is feeling. And so a high-functioning Jupiter, especially Jupiter in Cancer, these people have this tendency towards interest in psychology and interest in emotional understandings and being a natural therapist, a person who can understand other people. So the problem with psychology and psychiatry and psychoanalysis in the modern paradigm that we have it today is that the explanations for why people are feeling the way that they're feeling, they're very flawed, or they're very limited. And the remedies for the solutions are also very flawed. And the end result is more people are suffering from psychological illnesses. So mental wellness, especially in Western societies, it's plummeting. And the more people that are going to see these professionals, psychologists and therapists, mental health is getting worse because of this flawed paradigm that they're using to understand and then treat the psychological, the psyche of a human being. The ability of Jupiter to be able to dig into these layers of why people do things. Their explanations and their solutions are causing people to become psychologically worse. So this is a subject that I'm going to be diving into much greater analysis and depth when I finish this series on the forces of human nature, studying the planets and these videos on each planet, because we need to have a paradigm for what to look to start to heal the parts of our psyches that need healing. It's not enough to simply criticize the psychological models that are making people less healthy. This predatory model that creates forever patients and prescribes pharmaceuticals that are just kind of band-aids, and they have to be on those pharmaceuticals for their entire life. So before we dive deeply into the flaws of the psychological model, I'm building this foundation to point to of where we can look at what is that part of our psyche, how can we heal that part of our psyche, and look to the planets as the root causes and the root solution. So a highly functioning Jupiter is going to have this natural grasp on human psychology. And Jupiter is what we call a Brahmin planet, along with the Moon and Venus, meaning that these planets have the role to teach us about life and to teach ourselves about ourselves, to learn about ourselves, and then also to teach other people. So the Brahmin class, these are the knowledge gatherers, and then the givers of knowledge, the people who teach, who have the role of teaching any kind of subject, but to have that role in society. So a good psychologist and a good Jupiter has this gift of guidance to be able to show people to themselves and also to show them a better way forward if they're having a problem. So a highly functioning Jupiter, and again, your Jupiter can be in any zodiac sign, and developing that Jupiter is important. And when you're developing Jupiter, you can learn to give good direction to people. So you can accurately and logically show other people a healing path, to teach other people about themselves, and to teach other people how to be more productive, or to help them through something, give advice. And of course, Jupiter's name in Sanskrit and in India is Guru. So Guru, the person who is a sage or a spiritual guide. So a highly functioning Jupiter within a person, it's able to give good advice, but it's also able to receive advice, because receiving advice is showing you and to give you an opportunity to learn about yourself. And remember how Gemini describes Jupiter. He says that Jupiter knows much but says little. So a strong Jupiter knows when not to give advice at the same time, when to hold your tongue. So when you give advice, it's maybe the first rule is don't give advice to someone who's not asking for it. So an unhealthy and a toxic Jupiter, they're going to be the ones pontificating to other people, to give unpetitioned advice to other people. People aren't asking them to help them, but they want to tell everyone their opinion. Even if that opinion is correct or well thought out, they're the people that don't understand that some people, they need to learn in a different way, and they need to learn, say, through trial and error. They don't want to be told something, and they're more resistant to being told. They'd rather go through it themselves. And another thing I've noticed in my life is that if you think that it's your responsibility to give people advice and tell people something that you think they should know, and they're not, say, ready to hear it, or they don't want to hear it, you can set them back longer. You can make them, your goal is to help, but you're actually delaying them improving on something or to realize something. So only a good Jupiter knows when it's time to tell a person something, and that means that they're asking for it directly, or say subtly. They don't want to come out and say it, but to know when the right time is to inform someone or spread knowledge, and knowing when not to. And you could actually be hurting someone by telling them something that say they're not ready to know or ready to hear. So Jupiter, of course, is the planet of creativity, to be able to generate original thoughts and ideas, and eventually to physically manifest that originality, whether that be through physically manifesting a child, Jupiter the planet of children, or manifesting works of art, or just expressing your uniqueness, be able to manifest who you are into the world. So many artists, they produce great works of art in very high emotional states. And that gives that the stereotype of romanticism in the 19th century, how tortured artists, they have to be suffering emotionally to be able to produce these great works. And that artists in general are emotionally tortured people. There's some truth to that. But again, you're seeing this connection between creativity, Jupiter, and emotions. And emotions is a sign of Cancer. So Jupiter is able to essentially take abstract feelings, the abstract emotional world, and then manifest them creatively. And this is a natural process that we all go through. People who are artists, they can have a toxic Jupiter and have a very negative relationship with them and their emotions, but they're still able to do that process of producing and creating. Or you can have a highly functioning Jupiter that doesn't need to be in emotional turmoil to produce great art. So instead, a functioning Jupiter, a functioning Jupiter that's producing creative things or being a creative person, essentially what a person is doing is they're in touch with their abstract and intuitive self, and they're able to harness that part of them. It doesn't mean that part of them is suffering or being in complete breakdown mode or in turmoil, but they're able to harness this inner part of them and then externalize it in a clear way, in a form, in a medium. So Jupiter rules, and we talked a lot about this, Jupiter rules the ether element and our ability for hearing, our sense of hearing. And I believe that the greatest artists are the greatest listeners to the ether. So a great artist becomes essentially a channeler of information that goes beyond their own individuality and their own experience. So they're transmitting abstractions from within themselves, or abstractions that they're picking up in the world, that they're listening to the world around them, and then manifesting it into a concrete form, whatever medium of art that they do. And you'll hear a lot of great artists or great authors talk about this, that when they were producing a great work, something comes over them and the work kind of just creates itself, and that they weren't in full control of a story, and as if it came through them, and that they were merely an instrument in the process for that art to take physical form, as if a higher power is working through them. And if you've ever written a story or like when I wrote a script, you can kind of sense the story is trying to tell itself. And I know Stephen King, the author, says this, that when he starts a book, he writes the book and he's not planning it out. It's just kind of coming through him, and the story essentially writes itself. It's just coming through him, and it wants to go. It wants to go in a certain direction, and it just kind of happens. The story wants something, or the painting wants something, and you're just kind of completing it. So that's a sensation of creativity, that something is working through you, and that the work wants to be expressed, and you're just there. You're just the kind of the instrument to put it there. It's not all coming from within you, and this is all the process of listening to the subtle influences around you, and to be able to turn those subtle influences into a work of art. So Jupiter is our ability to hear and listen to the subtle influences of creation. And musicians very often will say that their greatest songs were created very quickly and not a painstaking process. So these are these moments of intense inspiration of creativity when Jupiter is highly attuned to the ether. So that's what a really good Jupiter will do, to be like the antennas up, to be able to receive information from the ether. And Jupiter has this very underrated quality of being able to listen. It's a great gift of Jupiter to be able to have that sense. And people want to spend a lot of time speaking but not absorbing, and Jupiter is this part of us that absorbs information. And Michael Jackson once said that, and this is a paraphrase, but he didn't believe that he was writing the songs, but that the songs were already there. And he was just basically able to grasp them from the universe and then transmit them, but they already existed. And that's a really interesting thought. And my favorite musician is Ariel Pink, and I think his music has this quality as well. I was listening to a song on his new album. It's called "I've Never Written a Demo Ever." Some of his new song on there, and the song didn't have any lyrics. It was a simple song, and it wasn't super profound, but it was good, and it had this quality that it already existed. The melody was so natural, and it flowed, that it was as natural as, say, a plant is as real, or it just kind of was already there. It had such a familiarity to it, even though I'd never listened to it before. And that kind of beauty that is not trying, so to say, it just is. And Ariel also says that he writes songs from his dreams. He'll hear a song in his dream, and when he wakes up, he performs it, he puts it down. And the story of the song Yesterday by the Beatles, the story was that Paul McCartney heard the song in a dream, and then he woke up and played it. And this is one of the most covered songs of all time. It's a beautiful song, but it hits that subconscious layer of human understanding, this subtle layer. And that's what Jupiter is. It's able to listen into that subtle part of us, and we can access that during dreams. And so that's how Ariel writes some of his songs, being able to really listen closely to what the world is telling you, and to be able to listen to your dreams and then produce beautiful works of art from that. So an important theme here of these descriptions that I'm giving is that a person with a healthy Jupiter has a very active inner life. So we know that Jupiter is this natural human tendency to create a belief system and an ethical framework and a philosophy about how the world works and the most ideal life that we should live, and how universally people should live. Jupiter is a part of us that creates this aspect of ourselves. I talked a lot about this in the first video. So a toxic and unhealthy Jupiter will be very rigid with their belief system, and maybe they'll love to pontificate their belief system. And these are the kinds of writers or the kinds of people that have the biggest book of beliefs, or they want to read these huge books about systems of beliefs with the most precepts, the most rules, and the most complexity, the opposite of simple, essentially. But everyone will create some kind of belief system because we all have a Jupiter. So a toxic Jupiter will really over-complexify it, and also be very externalized about what they believe, be very vocal about what they believe in a very rigid way. But a healthy Jupiter, because of this strong internal tuning that I've been talking about, and this ability to listen to themselves and to listen closely to the world around them, they'll create a worldview and a belief system that's going to be very much more fluid than very rigid. And they're not going to feel the need to have to externalize that worldview to other people, or not be able to have to pontificate their philosophy and, say, create a movement about what they believe. So the ethical framework itself is less important, and also the need to tell everyone what they believe is less important. And that is because they simply have a very much more alive inner life that is changing, and that they're listening to it, and they don't have to quote a book to reference what they believe. They're listening to their intuition. They see the deeper layers of their psychology. They're able to take in more information and to grow in knowledge, and always be seeing that beliefs can change. They're very fluid about beliefs. And again, a big part of it is they don't feel like they need to tell everyone about it, because it is always changing and developing. So a healthy Jupiter is very adaptive to moral questions and answers. And it's not solipsism, which is changing definitions to benefit oneself, like a hypocrite. But a healthy Jupiter sees the gray areas, and that gray areas of morality, they exist. And it really depends upon the context of a situation, especially the historical context. So a very deranged Jupiter consciousness will be very judgmental on history, and they'll judge history based on their current moral standards, and they'll throw the baby out with the bathwater of history, and say that moral standards, they are only getting better, and that everyone else in the past was wrong, and really throwing the context out of everything, not treating everything as changing moral dilemmas of morality are often shifting, and context is so important. So a quick example, almost all native cultures before what we call modern civilization, and even up until very recently, had very strict gender roles. A good Jupiter asks, why were there gender roles? Not just that there were, but why? Well, think about a culture that is reliant upon their food crop. People, they were always thinking about their pure survival chances. Their survival was always on everyone's mind. It was always at stake. And imagine living your life when the food source was, say, under question, or the utmost important thing of all times. It was not guaranteed. So if a neighboring tribe had a bad harvest and they invaded your village, and say, are you going to say send off all the women to go fight off the pillaging tribe? No, you have the men to do that. You have a strict code of conduct that the men fight off the warring tribe that's invading. Any tribe that thought it was a good idea to say, yeah, the women can go fight directly with them as well to be able to defend the tribe. Those tribes would be losing their women, losing the future, and not having, they would basically be wasting the women for a role that the men can do better, and they would get wiped out, and they just wouldn't exist anymore. So the warrior men are there to defend the tribe. The women had to raise the next generation, and this is very practical. It's extremely practical. And since the modern world, we have grocery stores and we have the Home Depot, so people don't recognize or appreciate the fact that in other historical contexts, there were very much different priorities. And earlier societies had moral codes about what they did and what they didn't do for really easy reasons to understand. And that's what the context is. So a good Jupiter is not only recognizing these important contextual details of history, but they're not judging other civilizations with the justification that their worldview is more equal or more humane or more just or whatever, that they're better. And you can say that certain cultures have done things better. They have better buildings. They have a healthier relationship with nature. But at the same time, you have a more comprehensive view of things. You can see the pros and cons, and why maybe some cultures advance faster than others, why some cultures did not. They were more traditional. They weren't trying to progress, and why they would do that. So this weighing of context and this seeing the bigger picture, this very important quality of Jupiter, to have this bird's eye view, to take in everything in a broad sense, so that you can come to a deeper understanding and not just a simplistic judgment. So a healthy Jupiter consciousness is seeing these gray areas in morality and ethics. And they're able to be more accepting of people who do things differently, without condensation, without the sanctimoniousness that we see so common today, when people think that their possibility, their ethical framework is the only viability. They're morally right and everyone else has got it wrong. So no, a healthy Jupiter loves to explore the bigger questions and to change information, or to change one's opinion on new information, and building this philosophy over time. But this fluidity is the key aspect of this healthy development of a belief system that a healthy Jupiter does. And a great Jupiterian philosophy is, again, not complicated. It's not a tome, a huge explanation for how a person should live. Rather, it's distilled wisdom, kind of like Marcus Aurelius in his Meditations, or Sun Tzu's The Art of War, getting down to the heart of the matter. And it can be, and these kind of simple explanations or a simplified worldview can be applied in so many different cultures and periods. This is why we have classics. And it's because they're not historically specific philosophies. They can be applied to people of all cultures universally. So Jupiter in Cancer, one of these traits is to have this kind of purity of conscience, because you're realizing that you're always changing and that there's a fluidity to our psychology, that we should always be growing and moving in different directions. So Cancer is the sign of movable water, and it's like a river. And a healthy Jupiter person is like a person that's on that river and living with the changes of the river. Or you can say a healthy Jupiterian person is like the water itself in the river, where eventually that fresh stream, it goes to the ocean. But along that path, there are crevices, there are changes in the water flow, there are boulders that have to be gone over. But eventually it ends up in the ocean with the rest of the water. Eventually we end up in the ocean being the symbol for all of consciousness. And we all take a certain path there that has these ups and downs, and the river is a complete river. And it's not just one little area, it's big. And that long and winding path, that comprehensive understanding, there's ups and downs in our life. And we have to just keep flowing with it. So a good Jupiter will have this kind of appreciation of the changes of life. And of course, Cancer is ruled by the moon, the planet of changes, the planet of adaptation. A really strong Jupiter uses that ability of the moon and of Cancer to change one's worldview, to be able to change psychologically, to be able to understand how other people change, and to keep flowing with it, to keep living with the reality that change is constant. So one last interesting detail about Jupiter that deals with the idea of distilling things down to what's most important, in the way that wise people, they will give these brief phrases, and they won't have the profound insights that they have tend to be very brief. So in the first video, I talked a lot about how Jupiter produces the best authors and writers. Also, Jupiter produces great editors, and also people who are good at grammar. Because first, grammar, it's a logical system of an abstract form, language being abstract, in that we're using abstract symbols to define the world. So language in and of itself is abstract, but people who are good at grammar, they are structuring this abstract thing we call language, and to be able to see that there's rules in it. And say an excellent Jupiter is a person even who creates new words, not just random letters together, but combining old words and combining them into new uses. This is a very creative way to use an abstract thing like language. But it's all based on a logical root word, and creating a new meaning, defining something in the world with a new word that best describes it. So people who are good at using language in very clever and inventive ways is a sign of a good Jupiter. But editors, also think about what an editor is. An editor really is the best friend of a writer. And it's not just in writing that we can be editing, but for writers, for the purpose of being a writer, I learned this when I was an opinions columnist at the University of Illinois, and every Sunday I would write the article, and then every Monday I would sit down with my editor and we would go over it line by line. And so every Sunday I would write it out and say, this is just as it needs to be, no mistakes. She's not going to have to change anything in what I just wrote. And every Monday would come, and of course, all of these different things. What does this mean? They're not being very clear here. I think you could say this in less words. And the articles got a lot better. And I was realizing that Nora, my editor, helped me so much with becoming a better writer, to be writing shorter and more precise. And it was a really fun process to improve. And slowly but surely, you are able to define things with more attention and clarity. And you can pack more detail, you can pack more meaning into fewer words. And now extrapolate this into how you can edit your life, edit your psychology, and be able to remove things that are no longer necessary, to not go on to useless avenues in life, to be able to take things out, to remove things, to purify your life in a certain way, to be more structured and to be more, precise, do more with less. These are all qualities of Jupiter, the way that we edit and kind of tweak things that can be better, like how you would tweak a philosophy or a belief system little by little as new information and new experiences happen to you. And so the last article that I wrote that year was it was a travel log that I wrote for a magazine, and I thought that was my best article because I was able to it was very short, and I was able to put everything I meant to say sentence by sentence. It wasn't any kind of long explanation. So it kind of summarized my style for that year. And it was very short and to the point, and being able to communicate deeper ideas in a very easily to understand way. So this is how good Jupiters can become people who have universal appeal to other people because of this simplification process, this editing process. So Jupiter gives the ability to get to what's most essential and what's most important. And this process of self-editing, and I use that word, it's very important, to distill thoughts into a more pure expression that's more genuine and more you, the essential part of you, and to be able to bring that out of yourself. So when you do this, the work that you do as a writer, as an artist, or as anybody, the more that you simplify what you do into what's the most essential, it actually makes, through the simplification, things become more broad, things become bigger. And Jupiter is this part of us that is able to encompass more into our perspective. So this healthy Jupiter will give a person this quality, and to develop this quality of this natural editor that is able to simultaneously make things simple, but also in that process to make things more universal so that more people can appreciate it and it can be applied for longer periods of times. It's more essential, and it gets at the heart of whatever it is you're talking about, or whatever it is that you're interested in, or whatever it is that you are seeking to express.